and welcome to NewsClick. The current session of Parliament has seen the Lok Sabha pass the Aadhaar Targeted Delivery of Financial and Other Subsidies, Benefits and Services Bill as a money bill. This is despite the protests of the opposition. The bill gives statutory backing to the Aadhaar project and, as per the government, enables efficiencies in the disbursement of benefits to Indian citizens and enables better targeting of those that require state assistance. This will supposedly free up a large amount of resources that the state can then use for social upliftment projects and other various projects that they might have. The law has, however, come in for a great deal of criticism from activists and academics alike. To explain why this project is being treated with such suspicion, we are joined by the rather outspoken critic, if I may say so, of the UID project, Professor Ram Ramkumar from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. Thanks for joining us, Professor. I'm going to jump straight in and sort of start off with a political question. The BJP, when in opposition, had raised various problems with the Aadhaar project, some of which echo what independent voices outside the political sphere have also said. Now, has the present bill made any changes to the scheme as proposed by the UPA government? Essentially, has the BJP addressed what it felt were shortcomings in the law previously?
The problem really that the BJP raised at that point of time, in the beginning, was related to national security, that this compromises on national security because the initial conception of the idea of a national identity number was by the earlier Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, which is what now continues as the National Population Register or the NPR. Now, later, however, more problems came to be raised by spokespersons of the BJP themselves officially. The first instance was when the then leader of Rajya Sabha and currently Minister of Finance, Arun Jaitley's call details, telephone details were illegally obtained by the then UPA government, allegedly so. And Mr. Arun Jaitley came out very powerfully in favor of the right to privacy. In fact, in a blog that he wrote in 2003, Mr. Arun Jaitley had actually said that the right to privacy is a part of right to life and liberty and hence embedded in Article 21 and hence a fundamental right. Unfortunately, it's the same position that Mr. Jaitley's Attorney General counters in the Supreme Court today. It's quite, in fact, Jaitley had at that point of time said that is indeed a fundamental right, and hence he said the call detail records being easily obtained by even a head constable, etc., is a huge invasion into one's privacy. And now with Aadhaar coming in, he said, these problems get exacerbated. And hence we need much more care as to how to legislate about these affairs. That was the point that Arun Jaitley had made, thanks to a problem that he himself ran into regarding privacy. Mr. Narendra Modi, currently Prime Minister, had a different problem. He said states were not consulted. And he said it is actually a problem of federalism in India and hence a problem of democracy that the government is not discussing this matter with state governments at all. It's another irony, just like Arun Jaitley's lack of support for the right to privacy as a constitutional right today, Narendra Modi has now decided to bypass the Rajya Sabha by classifying this bill as a money bill. And Rajya Sabha is actually the House of States. So it's an irony that Narendra Modi once upon a time said that it's actually violates principles of federalism, but he now goes around and bypassing the Rajya Sabha, which is just the same as violating federal principles.
A very, very interesting point there. Now, the Supreme Court has previously held that the Aadhaar cannot be made mandatory and cannot be a prerequisite for accessing services. How does this new bill affect the statement of the Supreme Court? So now can citizens actually be forced to hand over biometric details and so on to the authorities in order to access basic and essential services? And in fact, Jean Drèze has written a piece in today's newspapers where he talks about the various kinds of services that you could require an Aadhaar for, ranging from even buying an SMS or a cell phone SIM card, for instance. So how do you see the new bill working?
See, the matter under the consideration of the Supreme Court now is extremely significant. It is actually considering the question of whether privacy is indeed a fundamental right enshrined in Article 21 or not. That's a question. The argument of the Attorney General, Mukul Rohatgi, in the court was that it is not. And that the earlier benches, whichever benches which actually said that it is indeed a fundamental right, were actually small benches, and hence we need to look for the verdicts of the larger benches, which incidentally appear to have given a more vague interpretation of whether privacy is a fundamental right or not. The Supreme Court, the bench which considered the case, very clearly said that if Article 21 does not contain the right to privacy, it's actually of no use. Almost it made a remark very close to that. And then it said, however, we feel that for reasons of judicial integrity, it's better that such a decision is arrived at by a larger constitutional bench, and they have referred it to a larger constitutional bench, which is yet to be constituted, which has been constituted, but it has not met yet. Now, however, till then, the Supreme Court said you cannot make this mandatory, and till then, you cannot make Aadhaar compulsory for availing any otherwise your right kind of service from the government. It is this standing order of the Supreme Court that has been preempted by the current legislation, which is just a money bill. So it's very interesting that a money bill is being used, to bring in a legislation which has implications for the violation of fundamental rights of citizens. That's the whole point. If any legislation has, by indirectly or directly, violates a fundamental right of a citizen, then it needs deeper examination. It needs deeper examination by the standing committee, probably by legal experts, by the Rajya Sabha as part of a debate, and so on. None of it has been done. So I see it as an insult to the Supreme Court, as an utter act of utter disregard for the orders of the Supreme Court, whereby the money bill tries to make it mandatory. There is another point which I would like to mention here, which is a point which the earlier chairman of the UIDAI, Nandan Nilekani, had made. He said that it is both the UPA version and the NDA version of the bill calls it an entitlement. So you have a fundamental right. So suppose you have a right to food. Now you go to a ration shop to get that right to food, but then you are told you will have the right to food, but then you will need an Aadhaar number for getting that right to food. So Nilekani's argument at that point of time was that Aadhaar is actually a right to right. So actually, it's actually putting in an intermediate structure, which is completely unnecessary, in between the citizen and his right. The citizen has a right to food, but to ensure that right to food is there is another thing that comes in between. There's another obstruction that comes in between. That right then becomes meaningless.
So isn't this an aspect that the courts should also actually examine on whether you can create these sort of barriers to accessing fundamental rights, which are, as the name suggests, fundamental to citizenship?
In my view, the courts should take this up suo motu as a contempt of its own order, as an act of contempt over its own order, where it had actually said that it should not be mandatory. But the court should take into consideration the fact that parts of this legislation, I'm not saying the whole legislation, the parts of this legislation have the potential to violate fundamental rights which are given to the citizen, or at least a fundamental right that is currently sub judice in front of a constitutional bench. And at least till then, this should not be signed by a president. Or it should basically take the form of a proper financial bill and be considered by all layers of the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, including the standing committee.
Now, you've already touched on this topic briefly, but since it's one of the sort of core issues behind the Aadhaar project, I did want your opinions on the lack or otherwise of privacy protection surrounding the Aadhaar project, as well as the question of ownership of data generated by the UID authority. So could you quickly explain the primary criticisms of the project on these grounds, and also whether the new bill addresses any of these issues? For instance, the bill states that information can only be disclosed on grounds of national security or pursuant to a court order. There are also punitive provisions for unauthorized use or disclosure of information. So are these checks, do you think, insufficient, and why?
See, the fundamental problem with the bill is that it says that the data will belong to the CIDR, which is a government institution. And it says data that is stored in the CIDR will be used only for authentication and will not be given to anybody. Now, that is not quite as ensuring that the data that is actually present collected, stored, and used outside the CIDR is protected in the same way. The problem, the fallacy in the bill is that it considers the violation of privacy arising only from either a theft or a leak or something of data that is stored in the CIDR. It does not adequately consider the protection of that data which is outside the CIDR but yet connected to the CIDR.
Could you give an example?
For example, you go to an agency to get a service, it asks your fingerprint for authentication with the CIDR. A copy of that fingerprint may be kept with that agency for future use. Is that data protected? Can that agency use the data otherwise? There is some vague reference to that in the bill. However, it does not take into consideration the wide ramifications of this pervasiveness of your biometric information across different agencies, public and private, and the violation of the privacy that may result as a result of it. The whole point is we need only a separate privacy law, and in addition, a separate data protection law can take care of this vastness of this problem.
Now, various studies in different parts of the country show that the Aadhaar or UID scheme is not actually working in the various places that it is being used for a variety of reasons, ranging from the biometric system itself not being very reliable to a lack of internet connectivity and so on. I've seen reports that estimate that anywhere from 40 to 70%, in fact, of all transactions involving biometrics are returned as failed. So how do you see this issue being resolved? Can it be resolved within the current architecture of the scheme?
This is a systemic problem with the way in which Aadhaar project has been conceived and is sought to be implemented. Right from day one, there have been points made, including by people like me and others who have been arguing against it, that biometrics is going to be the core problem in the implementation of this Aadhaar project. Even at that point of time, we had raised this matter of the government trying a pilot project in one district for the implementation of LPG connections, whereby if you are going to get a new LPG cylinder, you have to actually give your fingerprint only then and authenticate it. Only then you can get the cylinder, take the cylinder home. Now, this was sought to be implemented as a pilot project, and the success rate at that point of time, as was reported in newspapers like The Hindu, was only 67%. In other words, about 33% was the failure rate. Now, such reports were coming from in 2010 and 2011 itself. So it's not a new issue being raised. It then was sought to be implemented in different pilot projects of NREGS in states like Jharkhand. It then was sought to be implemented in pilot projects related to PDS in states like Andhra Pradesh. From everywhere, reports have come that one of the main problems has been biometrics get rejected even when the person seeking authentication is indeed the same person. So there is an error rate which is very high. Secondly, internet connections, electricity connections are very poor, and as a result, it takes a lot of time as been pointed out in the newspaper article that you referred to a little while back. Sometimes it takes 8 to 10 minutes for one transaction to be completed because the data has to be sent. It's a 4 or 5 MB packet which has to go into the authentication server and then come back. So this has resulted in long queues and needless additional technical infrastructure being generated in between the customer and the service. So this is not a new problem. I'm trying to say that this is not a new problem. This has been pointed out from the beginning itself. UIDAI's consultancy reports themselves have pointed out this source of error in a big way. UIDA, however, brushed them aside, saying that we are not concerned with this. It will ultimately work. That was the very confident point that they made. However, reports coming from everywhere actually point out that error rates coming from biometric authentication are very high, and it is actually a source of exclusion for a large number of poor consumers.
Now, given that the Aadhaar project has been, going on for a couple of years, is there any evidence at all of improved targeting or delivery of benefits to citizens? I mean, there must be some benefits to the project in the time that it's actually been used. For instance, has it helped in reducing the amount of documentation that citizens need to have, because now you can just have one card instead of having 15 different licenses and so on and so forth. Or else maybe it helps in reducing duplication in beneficiary lists. So are there actually some benefits to the Aadhaar bill, and do you think that these can be cut away from the various drawbacks that you've already pointed out?
Let me say at the outset that it is a myth that Aadhaar is an absolute necessity to weed out duplicates. If you look at how Chhattisgarh PDS was reformed over a period of time, it happened before Aadhaar, and Chhattisgarh PDS officials actually removed all the duplicates from the list of beneficiaries without an Aadhaar. It just needs a committed set of machinery to make it happen. Now, so first, it's the myth that you need Aadhaar to weed out duplicates. Number two is that even if Aadhaar is there, one interesting data point will be very useful here, because a very large majority of people who applied for Aadhaar already had a identity card or something of that sort, either a passport or a ration card or something. They already had an identity document even while they applied for Aadhaar. In other words, it is a myth, it is a second myth, that a large number of people are without identity, and hence you need Aadhaar to solve the problem of lack of identity documents. That also is a second myth that was generated in this whole publicity blitzkrieg of Aadhaar. The third is, even if Aadhaar is available, does it attack the source of corruption or not? Take the PDS, for example. The major source of corruption of PDS is not between the ration shop and the consumer, but between the godown and the ration shop. The grain simply does not reach the ration shop from the godown of the FCI. That is the core, that's a stretch where the diversion happens. Once it reaches the ration shop, there isn't much of a problem in the grain reaching the consumer. So between the FCI and ration shop, where actually the largest amount of diversion happens, Aadhaar has no role to play. Aadhaar has a role to play in the second stage, which is between the ration shop and the customer, where in any case the amount of corruption is significantly less. So, I think we need to logically think about the processes involved in where corruption occurs, and whether a scheme like Aadhaar can actually make a difference to that stretch where corruption actually takes place. I don't think that is the case.
I think that's an excellent note to leave this interview on. We do hope you will join us again to follow the story as and when it develops. So thank you so much, Professor Ramkumar, for joining us today, and thank you for watching NewsClick.